Biden announced that we'd no longer be in a combat mission in Iraq by the end of the year. Talk about that announcement, and I guess in conjunction with the wind down in Afghanistan and what these things just truly mean.
Sure. Well, to talk about Iraq first, it is supposedly a change in status that will require some moving of U.S. troops out of Iraq. Well, there are supposedly about 2,500 there now. Though one thing I would note is that often those numbers aren't very accurate. They can be straight up lied about, or they're often the situation is that you have various soldiers, intelligence officers, people operating under intelligence authorities in which they don't really have to be, their presence doesn't have to be reported. So in terms of what might happen soon, I think you'll see a few soldiers leave. Maybe they'll say a few hundred will leave of the 2,500. And then they'll say that most people are shifting to non-combat roles, which means things like training, but also providing intelligence, operating drones, surveillance, sort of scouting the airspace. And I think what ends up happening is, whether it's in Iraq or even some of these other places, we're already seeing it, is that the US claims to be doing this sort of assist and advising role in which we're mostly training and perhaps providing some intelligence, but that quickly morphs into something more, whether it's accompanying people on raids or even just something like providing close air support, which is something that's happening still in Afghanistan. We're pulling out of Afghanistan allegedly, but and that is continuing a process that Donald Trump started. But really, we're already providing the existing Afghan government, the pretty beleaguered Afghan government, with an air force and bombing various Taliban positions to try to slow the advance of the Taliban. So there's a way in which, even as we claim to be changing status or even pulling out in Afghanistan to a significant degree, the actions we're taking, or as you said earlier on, the things we're really doing when it comes down to day-to-day fighting don't necessarily change that much.
So, so much of this, I think, is a PR exercise for the people involved, and the media really, because of many things. One is just a belief in the American project, the empire, the hegemonic nature of American foreign policy. There's that. Two, a lack of curiosity about these kinds of topics. And three, a gutting of international offices by mainstream publications where there's not necessarily an understanding outside of what the Pentagon tells you or desire to understand via investigative journalism, where they just kind of regurgitate these things. So it's quite easy for PR purposes for a Donald Trump or a Joe Biden to say, oh, I'm doing this full withdrawal, because it's framed from the perspective of U.S. troops. We are withdrawing U.S. troops, combat Americans. They're not going to be in danger. When, as progressives, or at least part of my project is, I don't want anybody in danger. I don't want our foreign policy assisting in the killing of anybody, no matter what nationality they are. And, framing our foreign policy in a way that maximizes that ideal. So, I guess just talk about that dynamic a little bit, how easy it is to say we're withdrawing from a place when we're not doing so, and how that's basically taken at face value by much of our media.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it is very much a product of sort of semantics and bureaucratic classification. We are not leaving. To say that we are is an overstatement. Afghanistan is the closest one that we have to where we actually are withdrawing some significant forces, but
we're hearing, just sorry to interrupt you, hearing just the constant framing about it is, well, the Taliban's going to take over. What about the women and girls? With the closest we're getting, we're already hearing that anxiety from the press and from the powers that be.
Yeah, and I think the press is definitely complicit in not asking these questions about what does that mean to withdraw? In Afghanistan, for example, yes, we are withdrawing from places like Bagram, one of the center of operations, but there's already reports that we're going to be having bases set up in some of the surrounding Central Asian countries, that there's been talk with Russia about renting Russian military bases in Tajikistan, so that we can actually sort of do what Biden has talked about for years, which is a more sort of counterterrorism and clandestine approach to continuing the war on terror, really. so that we'd have Navy SEALs and other special operations units going into Afghanistan with secret air support and things like that, but they would be based in a country adjacent, so it wouldn't really count. And then you have things like in Iraq, I think one of the main differences is, again, we're not really leaving, we're mostly confining people to bases. And what we've already seen is that American soldiers now represent a target for these often Iranian-aligned militias, and Iran, of course, is gaining influence in Iraq. So you have people who are sort of doing nothing or just assisting a kind of feckless Iraqi government, and then they're targets for Iranian militias who occasionally launch a drone strike or a few missiles, and they do sometimes hurt or even kill people. But then what you have is the US says we have to respond in the interest of collective self-defense or to protect our soldiers. And suddenly you have this escalating cycle of violence again, or reason to recommit ourselves to the region. So I think the point is, not only should we not be assisting in killing anyone, we really probably shouldn't be there at all, at least in a military capacity, because there is so much easy mission creep and sort of exacerbating the cycle of violence.
But also, I mean, the undercurrent that is not going to be said for that PR project that I'm talking about is that we are trying to curb the spread of Iranian influence as a part of our ongoing relationship with Saudi Arabia and with Israel. That doesn't sound as sexy to people in America whose sons or daughters or cousins might be over there dying for some of these causes. Just talk about the geopolitical kind of proxy implications of much of our true presence and that underlying effort.
Sure. Well, we ever since 9/11, we've disastrously handled our relationship and our rivalry, so to speak, with Iran. It's been way overhyped, the threat from Iran, and we had at least a nuclear agreement under the Obama administration that obviously the Trump administration pulled out of, and now Biden is trying to restore to some degree, but still is maintaining punishing sanctions against the Iranian people, which I think are cruel and counterproductive. And the biggest mistake among all the many mistakes probably the United States has made since 9/11 was invading Iraq, which besides being a humanitarian disaster and illegal, gave all this influence and power to Iran to influence the region from Iraq to Syria to Lebanon and elsewhere. And we're really dealing with the consequences of that now. For me, I don't feel a lot of investment if Iran exerts some influence in its immediate geographic sphere. But of course, this has become a reason to perpetually be engaged in the area. And also, the other side of that is what you were referring to, which is this sort of Sunni-Israeli axis that has formed between Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Israel, with occasional participation from other countries. And it's had a devastating impact across the Middle East. It's why we're involved in the war in Yemen, which is probably the world's biggest humanitarian disaster. And it's why we probably stay as involved in Iraq as we do. It's again to just counter this Iranian influence. It's hard to overstate, I think, how much that close US relationship with Israel and Saudi Arabia has kept us committed to this sort of path of conflict with Iran, which is a country that's by no means our friend, but certainly we have a lot of points of interest and could have a lot of things to cooperate on. And even after 9/11, Iran offered a lot of cooperation to the US, but David Frum, who I'm sure we're both great fans of, sort of ruined that by including Iran in the axis of evil speech. But there were times after 9/11 when Iran was offering the Bush administration cooperation on counterterrorism, Afghanistan, other matters, and we basically said no, and it's been a disastrous relationship ever since.
Hi, folks. Sam Seder here. Catch the exclusive version of this show on The Choice from MSNBC on the Peacock app at 4 p.m. daily, at least Monday through Friday. That's Eastern, 4 p.m. Eastern.